we're advancing. We're going through 1 Corinthians. We're learning all about Paul's message to a church that had an amazing set of gifts, more gifts than what we would generally see within the life of a church today. They had it all back then. It's the church that you go to. Well, it's the text you go to when you want to learn about the Spirit of God and how the Spirit moves. Yet strangely, it is also the text that you go to when you want to learn about what not to do in the church, what is wrong in the church, the excesses that can take place within the church. But it holds a very important place in the text, especially when it comes to dealing with the cultural influences of the day and the fight in which we find ourselves here in the 21st century? 21st century, yes. So, before reading our passage, we're in chapter 4 now, and I'm going to read a little bit in a minute, but before reading that, we need to understand that we're all part of a narrative, part of a story that started way back at the beginning and continues to this day. When you get to the book of Revelation, that is not the end of the story. The end of the story continues. When you get to Acts chapter 28, the story continues. The Acts of the Apostles continues to this day, and we're all a part of it. And you need to know where you're at in the story of God, because if you don't fit into God's story, then you'll find yourself lost in the sequence of time, lost in the circle of life. You'll find yourself lost and not knowing where you're at and where you're going and where you need to be. And so really the culture war is about who gets to tell the story of what life is all about. Who gets to, oh, that's a bit better. Who gets to delineate exactly what is taking place in the annals of time? Does China get to tell the story? That's what everybody's concerned about today. Does Russia get to tell the story? Who's telling the story? And where are you going to fit within the story? When you look at the Bible, you know that right now we are awaiting the return of the King. That's what the Bible teaches, that we are awaiting the return of the King. And in Corinthians, Paul has already been talking about that kind of thing. He said in chapter 1, verse 7, he says, "Therefore you do not lack any spiritual gift, as you eagerly wait for our Lord Jesus Christ to be revealed." That's the word that he uses is the same word that we have as our title for Revelation, apocalypse. As you wait for the revelation of Jesus. And then it says in chapter 3 and verse 13, it says, "His work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light." That is the day of judgment. That's the day of God. All right. And then we come to chapter 4, and chapter 4 talks a lot about judgment. Talks a lot about what God is going to judge and how he's going to... And it talks about how God's judgment on a thing is the only thing that really matters at the end of the day. Yeah, so people can think of you and say about you and talk about you however they want, and they could even make you feel guilty because they're judging you. But that's a false guilt. The only judgment that matters is what God has to say on anything. And so don't you go around wearing false guilt. Be set free of all of that. In fact, I hope during communion you were set free from all of that, because the only judgment that matters is God's judgment, and God judged us in Jesus Christ. Hello? God judged us in Jesus Christ and said, you're worthy of his Son. You're worthy for him to send his Son. That's God's judgment on your life, right there. Okay, so let me now read to you from 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 9 to 13. For it seems to me that God has put us apostles last, on display at the end of the procession, like men condemned to die in the arena. And we've been made a spectacle to the world and to angels and to men. We are fools for Christ, but you are so wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are honored. We are dishonored. To this very hour we go hungry and thirsty. We're in rags. We're brutally treated. We are homeless. We work hard with our hands. And when we're cursed, we bless. And when we're persecuted, we endure it. And when we are slandered, we answer kindly. Up to this moment, we have become the scum of the earth, the refuse of the world. In the light of that, who would want to be an apostle? In the light of what Paul talks about when he's talking about apostles, who would want to be one? And yet today, there are so many men and women who want to be called apostles. It was no different in Paul's day. There were people back then who wanted the title without the trials, who wanted the honor without the hassle, who wanted the badge but not the burden. Yeah. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 5, Paul calls them super apostles, like they were wearing a cape and could stop a speeding bullet and leap tall buildings, yes. And then later on in 2 Corinthians, he compares himself with these super apostles. He says, verses 23 to 28 of 2 Corinthians 11, he says, are they servants of Christ? I speak as a fool. He says that. So this is the second time Paul talks about himself as a fool. You got to realize that he is not having a moment of embarrassment. It's not as though he's feeling foolish. It is not as though he's become self-conscious. He has something to say. He's thought about this. All right? Are they servants of Christ? I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 lashes, save one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, and in perils in the wilderness, in perils at sea, in perils among false brothers, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in cold and nakedness. That was the life of an apostle then. not in private jets, not in Rolls Royces. You've got to understand, Paul isn't complaining here. He says in Romans chapter 8, he says, no, in all these things, we're more than conquerors. He's not complaining. He is modeling. He is embodying. He is describing within himself what God has called the church to become. Living within himself the whole encapsulation of what the church is to be. He is living it. He is living it. Yes. So he's not complaining. Paul gets arrested and thrown into prison. He says, this is really good. I'm going to get to write some letters to the churches. They put him off onto a ship and send him off to Rome. He says, this is really good. I wanted to go to Rome to encourage the church. On the way to Rome, the church is shipwrecked, and he's lost at sea, ends up on an island. He says, this is really good. I'm going to get to preach to the natives. While they're standing around a fire, warming themselves by the fire, a snake crawls out and latches hold of his hand. Everybody knows that he's going to die. He says, this is really good. I'm going to get to prove that God's got power. He's going to give me the antivenom, and this snake's not going to harm me. And so he tosses the snake back into the fire. That snake's the devil, by the way. Yeah. So the whole island ends up getting saved. There was a time where Paul was stoned to death. Stoned to death. Stephen was there watching it. It brought about Stephen's conversion. He was stoned to death. And he says, this is really good. I'm going to go to glory. And as he's heading towards glory, God says, no. Your time's not up yet. And so God sends him back down, and he comes back to life, and he crawls out from under the pile of stones that he's there, and he says, well, this is really good. I'm going to get to preach the gospel all the more. You can't keep this guy down. He is unstoppable. He is unstoppable. He is the living example of the church, of what the church is called to be. Yes. So it says there that God has put apostles on display at the end of the procession. Do you remember me reading that? Or do I need to read it again? We were all a bit quiet when I was reading it, so I was hoping you were listening. But you remember that. He says, God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession, on display, apetiedzen, on exhibition. God is wanting to show you off. Paul is saying that if you can face up to pressure and never give up, then God is going to show you off. He says, because if I can go through what I've been through, if I can go through, if you can go through whatever it is you're going through and still be here today, if you can go through all of the things that you've had to go through and still be here, standing for Jesus, still, after all of that, after everything that everybody has said, after everything that everybody has done, after all of the things that have gone wrong, after all of your beliefs that have ended up like smacking your head against a brick wall, after all of the things that have taken place, and you're still standing for Jesus? Woo! God is going to show you off, because you are proof that it's not by might nor by power, but it's by my Spirit. You are proof of the grace of God, that it's all by grace. That it's only by grace. Yes. I know you find it easy, but I don't find it that easy. You're strong, but I'm weak, he says. You're wise, but I'm kind of stupid. I make dumb decisions. I get in all kinds of trouble. You're honored. I'm dishonored. The only way that I'm going to make it is by the grace of God. That's what he's saying. And Paul says it's like he is at the end of the procession. The procession that he's talking about is the times. He's bringing us towards the end of time. We'll get to 1 Corinthians 15 eventually, probably by next year or the year after. But in 1 Corinthians 15, it's all about the resurrection. That's where we're heading. He is bringing us towards the end of the procession. Think of it as the process. Yeah. He's bringing us to the end of the process of time. And he even uses the word eschatos, from which we get eschatology, which is end times. And so Paul is saying that the presence of apostles, or the apostolic church, is the sign of the end. Woo! It is the sign of the end of salvation history. Where's Alex? The Heilgeschichte. Salvation history. Heilgeschichte. Let me give you another German word. The Sitz im Leben. How's that, Alex? The Sitz im Leben. Maybe it's my German accent. It's not. Ja, the Sitz im Leben. Is that better? So, sounds Dutch to me. The Sitz im Leben is the placement of the text. Where it sits in terms of its times, its zeitgeist, where it sits. So this kind of thing is important. It's an important hermeneutical tool when you're coming to understand Scripture. You've got to know the setting where something is said, because it meant something. And so when Paul is talking about the end of the procession, back then when the Roman army had a victory out there in Europe somewhere, in Gaul, all right, in Gaul, and they were coming back. They would come back with the commander, the prefect or the tribune would come back at the head of his army, and the soldiers would all be behind him, and then right at the very end they'd be carrying the spoils of war, and there'd be treasures, and there'd be weapons, and then there would be their slaves. And those slaves, they are destined for the Colosseum. They're destined to go in and fight against lions and tigers and bears, oh my. They're destined to be on display for all to see. And Paul is saying that we are like that. We're at the very end, and it's as though we're heading for the Colosseum. He says we've been appointed to death. Epithanatios. Tios, yes. So if you're into Marvel, you would know Thanos. So you can see that that's there in the word. So we're appointed to death. So Tertullian translated this passage. He says, God hath chosen us apostles last as beast fighters. Oh. He has chosen you. He has chosen us as beast fighters. Woo! I like that. Christine, kind of feeling uncomfortable. He says we've been made a spectacle to the world and to angels and to men. Now, if you've got a New International Version and a few other versions, you will see there that they only have basically two categories, that they where it says world, that they group the angels and the men in under that. Or they might put universe there and group angels and men, people, in under that. But when I read it, as I checked out the Greek, there's definitely three. The first thing is, it says is, I wrote it down. Where did I write it? Where did I write? Oh, I can't see. Oh, yes, there it is. It says, to cosmo kai angelos kai anthropios. So anthropos, anthropology, men. So you got that. Angelos, angels. Okay. And the first is the cosmos. Now the cosmos is more than just the world. It's cosmic reality. It is reality from God's point of view, and it goes all the way from the top of creation all the way down to the bottom, from the heavens down to hell. And Paul is saying that we are on display in like a theater before everything in the universe, from the heavens down to hell. And angels, yes, they have a special place. Angels are watching. Angels are watching. Right now, angels are watching. Wherever you go, angels are watching. They're watching. They're watching. They're always watching. And people are watching, always watching. You don't get away with much at all. Especially if you're married. You don't get away with much at all. People are watching. If you haven't noticed, there are cameras, more and more cameras going up everywhere. You go to the checkouts and you'll look up, and on the screen of the checkout that you're at, you can see yourself because there's cameras watching. People are watching, people are watching. But also, the whole cosmic order is watching like there's a theater. Shakespeare was right when he said that all the world is a stage and we the actors upon it. He was right when he said that. Paul is saying that we all have a role to play in the world today. We've got a role to play in this cosmic order that God has created. It says in Romans chapter 8 that all of creation has been waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. That's what it's talking about. Talking about our place in holding the cosmic order together. And if we hold on to our faith, and if we keep on testifying of the grace of God and the life of Jesus within us, if we hold our witness, will somebody give me a witness? Have you ever heard that? Well, no, I don't expect Sharon to, because Sharon's only been going to church for the last 6 years since we started. But if you've been around for a while, you'll hear old-timey preachers say things like, "Can I have a witness?" And people in the congregation will go, put their hand up and they'll go, "Yes," or they'll say, "Amen," or something like that. And what they're saying, what you're asking for when you say, "Can I have a witness?" is that you're wanting agreement over something. It's like when I say, "Let's," and everybody said, and we all go, "Amen," looking for agreement, because our witness is a unifying factor. It is the thing that holds the universe together. And Paul is saying that apostles have a special role in doing that. All right. Now we're coming to what I want to talk about. Okay. And Paul says we are fools for Christ. We just read that Paul said, "I speak as a fool." I speak as a fool. It's the Greek word moros, from what the word that we get moron from. Yeah. The fool is the village idiot. It's the court jester. Do yourself a favor sometime. There's an old movie called The Court Jester, starring Danny Kaye. You will still laugh today, even though the film is, yes, very old. I was less than a kid when it was made. But you may have seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Disney. It's a very clever cartoon. There's a scene in there where the hunchback is given the archbishop's mitre, his hat, to wear. And there's another scene where his head is the head of a donkey. And these things where the fool, the village idiot, was dressed as the bishop or dressed as the donkey actually took place in church, where a day was set aside during the year where that kind of thing took place. And you're wondering why do something like that? There is a reason. And that is that the fool kind of stands outside of regular, normal perceptions of things. Doesn't do the ordinary and the expected things. The role of the fool is to poke fun at the establishment. Okay. Playing the fool is dangerous. Most comedians, the good ones at least, end up struggling psychologically. The best comedians generally have high IQ, very high IQ, but they often end up having to have treatment because their perspectives drive them over the edge. So you think of people like John Cleese and Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean, Robin Williams, Jim Carrey. I'm coming to you. Jimmy Carr, Peter Cook, Peter Sellers. Hilarious, funny, but they could also be very cutting in their wit. One word that is used to describe these kinds of comedians is edgy. Edgy. The fool stands on the edge. Their view is often from the outside looking in. They're often lonely. Yes. Day after day, alone on a hill, a man with a foolish grin is keeping perfectly still. They can tell that he's just a fool, and he doesn't seem to notice he's the fool on the hill. See the sun going down, and the eyes in his head sees the world spinning round. Yeah. And yeah, this is real thinking stuff here. I'm in thinking territory. So I hope you brought your brains with you today. The great thing about humor is that it helps you to handle life, because life can be tough. And so when you've got somebody that's funny, they can talk about serious things, but they do it in a way that disarms the power of whatever it is. They'll say something about the diabolical situations that are taking place in the world, and they can just, because they're very intelligent, they can just put a bit of humor, and it disarms the power of that thing over your life, and you end up laughing about something that a few days ago you were crying about. And, it helps you to process it. Yes, when I master something, I can treat it lightly. I'm at my best when I'm not so serious. Oftentimes I say something and I'm being a little bit foolish and the other person takes it seriously, and I think, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. Laughter builds a bridge. It disarms people. There are times when I can be doing something, concentrating on something, lifting something, and Sasha will say something funny, and then I've lost all my strength. Yeah. That's the whole problem that Samson and Delilah had. He lost all his strength. Yeah. The best comedians are self-deprecating. They're happy to be put down themselves. They will often put themselves down. That sounds a little bit like what Paul is doing here, doesn't it? Where he's, you're wise and we're stupid. You're rich and we're poor. Sounds like he's putting himself down. The Aussie humor is self-deprecating. Yes. We'll poke fun at each other. And what we don't, the best Aussie humor can have a laugh. We'll do things to one another, and it's like the joke's on you. Yeah, but the next time it's going to be on me. I understand. That's how it goes. Yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah. What you don't want is somebody that can't take a joke. Hey, when you're dealing with somebody that can't take a joke, then they're giving you warning signals. Dangerous territory. But we're in a world where the culture war is such that you can't tell jokes anymore. That's important when it comes to us here in Australia, because ingrained in our identity is the ability to poke fun at each other. But we're not allowed to do that anymore, and so our identity is now under threat. I think part of what happened with the recent vote that we had is about our loss of identity. We're not allowed to be who we are. Yeah. So we were at lunch the other day. Sasha and I were at lunch the other day with Greg and Sharon, and we're in a restaurant, and Greg said something totally inappropriate. It really was, even by Greg's standards. Totally inappropriate. And Sasha laughed and said to him, "Oh, Greg, only you can get away with that. Only you." And that is what the fool does. He is able to say things that others couldn't get away with. Yeah. So when you come into the Bible, there are fools in the Bible. There's, it says that Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king. The cupbearer was the one who dispensed a little wine to the king and kept him happy. It was his role in the court to keep everybody lighthearted, to keep everybody in a place of enjoyment, because the king didn't want grumpy people and people around him that were too serious. He wanted everybody in his court to be in a good mood. And so when Nehemiah one day hears about Jerusalem being in trouble, he comes into court to serve as the cupbearer, and he's brokenhearted. He's got a heavy heart. And Nehemiah looks at him and says, "What's going on here? This can be nothing other than sadness of heart." And it says that Nehemiah was very scared because it was his job to keep everybody happy. And then you've got, in the story of Joseph, you've got a cupbearer there. And he ends up in prison. He ends up in prison on the same day that the baker ends up in prison. And so obviously, he has said something to Pharaoh that Pharaoh didn't like. Or maybe the wine that he was serving wasn't to Pharaoh's taste. And he ends up in prison because it was his job to keep the Pharaoh happy, to keep him in a good mood. You know, in the courts, the court jester is the only one who can deliver honest truth to the king. But he does it in such a way that it disarms the king. Things that others wouldn't be able to get away with, the court jester, the funny man, the cupbearer, he can say. Yeah, because he does it with a bit of a joke thrown in. And so he can tell the king that you're getting a little bit too serious. Well, obviously, when it came to the day when the cupbearer and the baker both ended up in prison on the same day, the Pharaoh is obviously becoming a bit of a tyrant. It was actually a sign that his kingdom, as it was in danger, under threat of coming to an end, but he didn't find that out until a couple of years later when Joseph told him the story. But these are examples of old-time fools or people that had an important place, but their role was not as you would expect it to be. There's another fool in the Bible. You're not going to necessarily think that that I am looking for my handkerchief. Hey? Oh, thanks, darling. Well observed. There's another fool in the Bible. You'll be surprised. Just give me a few minutes. His name is David. David. Yes, David. So the first scene that you find David entering into after he's been anointed by Samuel is on the battlefield. And there's his brothers, and Saul is there, and the army of Israel is there, and on the other side of the valley, across from the Wadi Isat, there is the Philistines. There are the Philistines, and their champion, whose name is Goliath. Now his brothers, David's brothers, they didn't want David to be there with them. He was an embarrassment to them. And so when David is there and Goliath steps out to the edge of the valley and yells out across the valley, "Give me a man and we will fight," everybody in Israel disappears, hiding behind rocks, behind trees, behind shrubs, putting their heads in the sand, hiding. Saul himself had disappeared. David's brothers were hiding. Everybody be quiet. It's the giant. It's the giant. The giant's out there. We don't want him to know that we're here because we're afraid. Okay. And here's David. Who is this? He's a boy. He's just a teenager. Who is this? That he would talk to you all like that. And his brothers, shh, shh, shh. And then he goes, "What? Aren't I even allowed to say anything?" Everybody's trying to keep it quiet. Think how they must have felt. Have a little boy pointing out how pathetic they were. The next scene, okay, I know I haven't convinced you yet, but wait. The next scene, he's in Saul's tent, and Saul is been convinced by David that David is going to go out and fight the giant. Saul, who was head and shoulders above everybody else in Israel, should have been the one over there, but here's this young teenager saying, "I'll do it." Just like Crane over here. Just like Crane over here. "I'll do it." Crane would be that kind of boy. "I'll do it." And Saul says, "Oh, okay." And Saul puts on his armor, which is designed to fit somebody that is head and shoulders above everybody else, onto this little framed teenager. Now, let me ask you, who wears clothes that are too big for themselves? Who does that? Big feet, big jackets, big pants that are too big. Who does that? Clown! He has a big red nose. the clown. And so here's David. Now, he may not realize what he's doing, but here's David strutting around, falling over. And what he's saying is, don't you see who should be fighting? And he's just playing the fool. And then, to rub salt into the wound, he goes over, and all of Israel's army are there with their axes and their swords and their shields, and they've got tanks and bazookas. And David goes, I'll show you how this is done. And with a rag and a rock, he kills the giant. With a rag and a rock, they got all of their militia. And he does it with a rag and a rock. How do you think they felt? And how do you think Saul felt? I'll tell you how Saul felt. Because they started singing a song, all the young ladies back home. David, all he's done is kill a giant. And suddenly his name is on the top of the charts, and their song is, Saul has slain his 1,000, and David his tens of thousands. And the Bible says that Saul was jealous. Okay, I think I've got a little bit further. So then, the next time we see David, he's called into Saul's service, and his job is to keep Saul happy. And he's playing the harp, and he's singing psalms. He is the entertainer. Okay? And then, this is my clincher. This is it. This is my clincher. Then David is running for his life because Saul is trying to kill him, and he goes over into the Philistine camp. He goes to Gath. Do you know what Gath is famous for? That's where Goliath was born. Gath is the last place that you would want David to be running to, because he was the guy that killed Goliath. There was wanted signs with David's face there. Rewards were given. And David turns up at Gath, and he says, oh, I can see I'm in a precarious situation here. And so he starts drooling and dribbling. And they say, this guy, he is mad. He has lost the plot. And so he forms then a fifth line, and from Gath, or from the Philistine camp, he then makes raids upon the Philistines without anybody knowing it, and does things for God behind the scenes. Fifth column. That was the word I was looking for. Fifth column. Okay. I got too much to say. Let me get through this. All right. So you've got these fools. I've brought up Nehemiah, the guy that was in Pharaoh's dungeons, and David, and yes, in with Joseph there, and then there's all of these guys were a sign. They were a sign that things are changing. The world is changing from one situation into another. There's two things you want to watch for. so that you can know when you're at the end of the world as you know it. One is the fool, and the other are giants. So you remember before the flood, you had these strange people called the Nephilim, who were giants. But you also had Noah, who was spending 120 years building an ark in a place that had no water. He, as far as everybody around him was concerned, was a fool. And you had giants. And then you got David, and you've got a giant. All right? Here's another one, Elijah. Elijah the Tishbite. The word Tishbite, who knows what that means? Anybody? The word Tishbite means stranger. Elijah wasn't even born and bred Israelite flesh, and yet he was Israel's sole prophet. And he comes on the scene, and the king had married Jezebel, and she'd brought with her 450, I think, prophets of Baal, and 400 prophets of Asherah, I think it was. Okay. And so the people of Israel were confused. They were confused between wanting to follow God, but then here's this other thing that is being promulgated as being the way that we should go. You know, today you might say it's a choice between following Christianity or following scientism. You might, because that's how it's put. It's faith or rationality. Yes. So that's brought about the confusion that we are experiencing today in the church and in the world. Yes. Back then it wasn't like that. They had a different giant to face. They didn't have big pharma, and they didn't have big tech, and they didn't have giants like big media. All right? So the giants. And so, are you with me, or have I lost everybody? Okay, all right. So they're all confused. Elijah comes on the scene, and he says, "What's going on here? I want everybody to assemble up there at Mount Carmel. And all you prophets of the devil, you come along too, and we're going to see who's God. We're going to see who is God." And so all of Israel come, and all of the demon prophets, all 950 of them come, and Elijah is there, and he says, "Let's build 2 altars, and the God who answers by fire, we will know that he is the true God." And so they build these 2 altars, and the prophets of Baal are there calling out to their God, crying out to their God to send down fire and prove that Baal is God. And they're cutting themselves, and it says that they cut themselves so much the blood was gushing everywhere. And Elijah says, "How long will you stand between 2 opinions? If Baal is God, then follow him. Or if Jehovah, Yahweh, is God, then follow him." And they're cutting themselves. And the blood is pouring out everywhere. And then Elijah gets up and starts playing the fool. And he says, well, I'll tell you what he says. He says, "Shout louder. Perhaps he is daydreaming, or," listen to this, "relieving himself." Now, there is no humor especially if you're a kid, that is as funny as potty humor. There is no joke that a young boy finds funnier than jokes about accidental wind breakages. It's as funny to them as a cow honking his horn or honking his nose. And so this is what Elijah is doing. He is playing the fool. He's saying, or maybe he's on a trip or asleep and needs to be awakened. He is being the fool. All right. Now, when John the Baptist comes on the scene, it says that he comes in the spirit of Elijah. John the Baptist was born to a family of priests. He should have been a priest. You can get nothing that is more central to Israel's society than the priesthood. But John rejects all that, and when you see him, he comes out of the desert. He's wearing camel's clothes. He's got honey gluing his beard together, and this little locust leg is hanging out of his mouth. And he speaks to all of the establishment, to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Roman soldiers, and he says to them all, doesn't care, says to them all, repent! Repent! And then they take him into Herod's court, and Herod finds him entertaining. Yeah, if it wasn't for Herodias, who didn't see the joke. All right. All of these are harbingers of the end. So Jesus says that John is the last and greatest of the prophets. And now there's a whole new world order coming in when Jesus went to the cross. So I don't know why people today want to be a prophet and model themselves off of the Old Testament, because Jesus says we've got something new. Back to Paul. Paul is in Caesarea. He's in prison. And he's there during the reign of Governor Felix, and then a guy comes along whose name is Porcius Festus. You wanted me to say Porcius Pigius, didn't you? King Agrippa comes to town and wants to have an audience with Paul. And when Paul was giving his testimony, Festus interrupts Paul, and this is what Festus says to Paul. Are you mad? Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you insane. So when Paul talks about himself being a fool, it's not as though he hasn't thought about this a lot. I got a verse from you from Hosea chapter 9, verse 7. It says, the days of punishment are coming, the days of reckoning are at hand. Let Israel know this, because your sins are so many and your hostility is so great, the prophet is considered a fool. The inspired person, a maniac. Yes, all right. So in the Old Testament, the prophets were fools. In the New Testament, it's apostles. All right. So Paul is the person who models to us how we should live in an upside-down world. And I'm going to quickly give to you, he is the one who models to us how to live at the very ends of time, when things are coming to an end. I'm not saying that the world is coming to an end in the next little while. I was part of a group of people that said in 1844 on October 22, Jesus was coming back, and people sold their houses and went out and stood on a hilltop waiting for Jesus to return on October 22, 1844. I was part of a group, not that I was alive then, but I was part of a group that grew out of that. I'm not saying there's a when, I'm just saying read the signs. Jesus said, don't be unaware of the signs of the times. All right? And I'm saying that this little passage here that we often would read through and just think, oh, well, that's interesting. Paul calls himself a fool, not really understanding, but it means something. I'm just saying that. And Paul says at this time, he says, this is what we do. We work hard with our hands. So be productive. Be productive. Don't stand around looking at everything that is going wrong with the world and shrug your shoulders and say, nothing can be done about this. I'm just going to get depressed. Do something. Be productive. Do something to make the world a better place. Do something to make your life, your children's lives, better than what it was. Some people look at the world around us and say, I wouldn't want to bring any children into this world. Don't do that. Be productive. Be productive. Have more children. Secondly, he says, when you are cursed, bless. Hold your tongue. Don't give tit for tat. Then he says, when you're persecuted, endure it. He's talking about endurance, going the extra mile. And then he says, number 4, he says, when slandered, answer kindly. So whatever you do, don't play the victim. If you're cursed, bless. If you're cursed, if somebody curses you, then bless them. If anybody persecutes you, then endure it. If somebody slanders you, answer kindly. I don't read anything there about being a victim. And you have to be careful about taking up the cause of victims. I'm not saying that there aren't victims. Of course there are victims. But you've got to be careful not to take up whatever it is they're going through as your cause for offense. You've got to do something good about it and not allow that to become the narrative. Yeah. And there's a lot of victimhood mentality in the world today. And that is part of our fight that we're fighting. And then finally he says, up to this moment we've become the scum of the earth, the refuse of the world. I've spoken too long, but I just need to give you a bit more Sitz im Leben. A little bit more of what is going on. So there's 2 words that Paul uses there. He uses the word scum. The Greek word for that is perikathemata. And it occurs nowhere else in the New Testament. But it used to be used, so that we can understand what it means. It used to be used for an unfortunate of society, one of the unfortunates who was chosen to become the scapegoat. And they would kill this person as a sacrifice to bring about relief for society. They would often throw a party on the day that they were going to be sacrificed, and this person would be heralded as some great person, but they were actually just chosen to die for everybody else. And then the other word that Paul uses is refuse, peripsema. That's it. Peripsema. It's translated a thing scraped off. And the people would take a slave or a servant, they'd say to him, be our peripsema, our redemption. That's what they would say. Be our peripsema, be our redemption. And then they would toss him into the sea to appease Neptune. That's if you're Roman, or Poseidon if they were Greek. And so Paul is saying that we're at the end like the scum, like those that are being used as a scapegoat for the world. Now the church is used constantly as a scapegoat so that others can say, it's all your fault. It's this world that you've created. It's this Western society that you have established. It's everything, it's all of the traditions that have come down to us through the church. That's the problem. What we need to do is be set free from all of that, and then we'll be all right. And Paul is saying that the church, like him, is like the scum of the earth, is like we're there being held out as the sacrificial lamb, so that the world can say that it's not our problem, it's yours. And you watch, as time goes on, the fingers will be pointing all the more in your direction, especially if you stand up for your faith, especially if you hold on to your faith. You'll find you'll have family members that will turn against you. You will find that there will be people within your street that will aim the problems in your direction. And this, everybody, is just simply a sign that we're heading towards the end. I'm not saying it's going to happen next week. I don't think it will. But I'm ready if it does. I'm not saying it will happen next year. It looked like during the great lockdown that things were really getting tight and heading there rapidly. That was a sign. That was a sign. Yes. And so Paul is giving us all of these signs to say that we're at the end. So let's live our lives like people who are serious about our faith. Yeah. And you know, we need people like Greg. Greg tells me some home truths that nobody else would dare tell me. But he's cheeky when he says it. You know, so he gets away with it. And I only get a little angry because I'm also laughing on the inside. But these are signs, and Paul is saying that when you see the fool, there's a sign. And when you have, well, this is how upside down our world. I'm going to finish right with this because I had so many things to say, and I've only been able to share about half of what I had to say. But when you've got, what's that girl's name that does the climate activism? Yes. The Thornburg girl. And when she's standing up at a climate activist demonstration, and there she is, not talking about climate, but she's talking about Palestine and what should take place there. And a climate activist comes up from the audience and says, I didn't come here to hear about what's happening in Palestine. I came here to talk about the climate. And then, so when you have these extreme views that are suddenly arguing with each other, you can see that things are coming to a head. And then Greta starts calling out, no climate action on occupied land. And all of the climate activists are going, no climate action on occupied land. And people are looking around going, I don't really know what we're saying here, but we're doing it. And then when you have, at the UN, elected Ali Bayrani, and he has been elected as the chairperson for humanitarian considerations within the UN. And he's one of the Khomeinis from Iran. You can see how upside down the world has become. And then the comedians come out on stage and they say, look at what's going on here. It's hilarious. And they're just poking fun at all of these extreme things that are taking place in the world today. And it's all a sign, you see. It's all a sign that if they can even see it. All right, how will I finish this? All right. So I'll finish it with what I've got here. So this calls for the church to become fools for Christ because, and you've been waiting for it all message, I know, because if you're not going to be a fool for Jesus, then whose fool are you going to be? So the church needs to become a fool for Christ. We need to become beast fighters. And they'll laugh at you and they'll mock at you for your faith, and they'll scapegoat you and they'll cancel you. It's all right. But have the courage to stand by your convictions, because this is what is needed at the end of the world as we know it. Yeah.